Today we are going to make a simple apple tart, a galette. It's freeform. There is real opportunity for creativity here, but honestly, it's one of the most simple and elegant looking desserts to put on the table. Any reason for celebrating that you might have, but especially in the fall when apples are everywhere and the variety of them are plentiful, and you can really play around and make it sweeter, make it a little more savory. There are versions of this tart where you can use goat cheese with your apples and really kind of play up your culinary adventurous spirit. And then obviously the classic sweet version is really just apples, a little bit of lemon, sugar, a really simple pâté brisé or savory pie crust. And you'll see, it's kind of just a good little thing to tuck in your back pocket and have in your arsenal for when you want to wow and impress and still keep it easy on yourself. And the thing that makes this so exquisite to look at is the arrangement of the apples that ends up being kind of this like beautiful shingled mosaic of crisp, sweet tart. In our case, we're gonna actually use Granny Smith because I really love the zingy, like hits you the back of the mouth tartness of that, but also some Pink Ladies. You can use Honeycrisp, something with a little bit of sweetness to it. So you get bites that are a little bit more sour, bites that are a little bit sweeter. And you will see that sometimes simplicity really is best. And it's why apple tarts remain a classic and a favorite. Okay, so we're gonna start by making a very simple, not too sweet pie dough. And if you know anything about making pie dough, you know that like the number one thing that we care about is creating a tender, flaky crust with butter. And the way that you do that is by working quickly, working with cold ingredients, and then letting your dough rest and refrigerate so it comes back to a cold temperature before you try to roll it out. These are ways that you are going to set yourself up for the most success. I'm also trying to keep the ratios on this pie crust kind of easy because something that I get really like deeply excited about is the idea of making like memorable recipes, things that you can literally commit to memory, and then they just flow through you. You don't need to reference anything, and it feels that much more intuitive and confidence boosting, and that to me is the goal, always. Okay, 2 cups of flour, a little pinch of salt, and then maybe call it like 2 teaspoons of granulated sugar into this dough, just to give it a little bit of sweetness. Mix that around, and then get your butter that you have had in the refrigerator until the last second, the bitter end, because we want it as cold as possible. Carla Hall actually taught me a very cool trick way back when at the Chew, which is that you can take frozen butter and grate it on a box grater, and then you get like, you skip like 10 steps towards the process of pinching the butter into the flour. So if you have frozen butter, you should do it that way. So I want a stick and a half of cold butter just out of the refrigerator. So that is 1 1/2 of this stick. And sometimes I get a little generous and do like a little more than half the stick. And we are going to quickly cut this into cubes. At this point, if you have a pastry cutter that you want to use, go for it. Otherwise, we are going to do it the old-fashioned way, just with good old-fashioned pinching. Toss your flour together to coat the butter pieces, and now just start pinching them between your thumb and pointer knuckle so that you get these sheets of butter pinched together with the flour and the salt and the sugar. And what this is doing is creating those layers of butter in between layers of flour so that you end up with structure from the flour and then steam and moisture from the butter that together work to create lovely flaky layers, tender crispness, and a wholly satisfying crust recipe. So right about here where most of the butter is pinched into the flour and we have this kind of lovely almost shard consistency. There are a couple pieces that are still a little bit bigger, which I kind of like, but for the most part it is really well combined and still nice and cold. Now we're going to start to add our ice water tablespoon by tablespoon. And like I said, it's really important to have everything be really cold to help that butter not start melting. You can use a wooden spoon here, but I just use my fingers because I need to know at that exact moment when this dough has enough liquid in it to start to pinch together. I'll show you how you're going to tell. All right, so that was 2 tablespoons. Let's add a third. And keep it coming together. Still quite a lot of dryness here, but basically when I can pinch it and it holds together beautifully, that's when we are at a good hydration point. This is the 4th tablespoon. So if you pinch it together, I'm gonna go 1 more tablespoon. It's a little dry because it just really kind of broke apart when I pinched it then. And you see, I'm just like kind of working with my fingertips, not really the palms of my hands, which are warmer. And this should be a good, but look, you'd think this was too dry. Look at how like sandy it looks. And then you pinch it together and it holds together beautifully, not crumbling apart, really lovely and formed. That is good. Gather it together in your bowl, and then we will turn it out onto our plastic wrap and form our little disc. Okay, so I have some plastic wrap here, and I'm just going to gather my dough ball together. Try not to squeeze it too much. We're really going to actually leverage the plastic wrap to help us make this a tight little ball. So just gather your plastic wrap together. Kind of just try to squeeze some of that air out. And then watch what happens here. Kind of pinch it together, and then you just push the dough down and it kind of fills into the pockets with the plastic wrap, and you are left with a lovely disc with beautiful pockets of butter still visible, which is how you know you're in business. So I'm just opening it so you can see. So like a pocket of butter like that. That's how you know the butter is still intact. It is not melted. You are going to be able to use this dough to create a flaky and buttery apple tart. I'm going to tuck the dough in the refrigerator half an hour ideally, and that's going to let the flour hydrate with the butter and the water in here. It's going to let the butter get cold again, so when we roll it, it stays lovely and chilled. And we can get started on our apple filling. I'm going to peel 4 to 5, small to medium apples to get us what we need to fill in this lovely raw form galette. I am going to use an assortment of some tartar, like a Granny Smith apple, because I like that sweet tart effect. And then a few sweeter apples like this Pink Lady. I love a Honeycrisp. And then we'll thinly slice them and give them a little flavoring. But again, we're keeping it simple today. So we are going to slice these apples up in half first, and then use any melon baller or a teaspoon or a tablespoon measure just to scoop out that central core, any tough area around it, and also the base and the stem. Ta-da! And I want my slices thin enough that I'll be able to shingle them, but not so thin that they are going to completely melt in the cooking of the tart. So maybe like a 1/4 inch thick. So obviously apples start to turn brown really fast. So once you get them cored, and you can work one at a time so that you're not racing the clock on this one, quickly slice them into your thin slices and squeeze some fresh lemon juice all over top. So squeezing the lemon over top is good for 2 reasons. Number 1, it obviously provides a punch of flavor and a little tart acidity, which we love to balance out the sweetness in this tart, but it also stops the apples from oxidizing as quickly so that they stay really fresh and vibrant and green, as opposed to turning brown the way that apples are very quick to do. And now is really your chance to season these however you like. I am going to just do a little dash of cardamom, and because it does seem to be everyone's favorite, a little cinnamon too. Maybe a teaspoon of each. You can just use your hand to quickly toss these together. And then I'm going to grab a tablespoon of flour because I am going to brush a little bit of apricot jam over the base of this galette before I form it. And the flour will work together with the jam and with the apple juice and lemon juice in this mix to form just like a slightly thickened jamminess that we're going to love. Plus I'm going to add a few knobs of butter over top of the tart as it's baking, and I want that to get soaked up by something. I'm not going to mush too much because I don't want these apple slices to get crushed. We're going to try to create lovely little shingling patterns. Set your apples to the side and let's start making our galette crust, our tart crust. Get a dry, clean surface ready to go. And I will take this moment to confess that I really don't like apple pie very much. I don't, even great ones that I've had and I recognize they are true feats of baking mastery. Well, first of all, if I'm trying to make them myself, it's very stressful, and dessert is supposed to be relaxing and delightful. And I find that having to roll dough not once but twice, or potentially latticing on the top, it just adds to the complication, even though it sometimes is beautiful. I find that frequently the crust on the bottom of the pie is just not that crisp and tender. It's kind of chewy and gnarly. And just texturally, it's not worth the time and insanity that it creates. Freeform tart, which is what a galette is, really goes the extra mile to make it as easy as humanly possible to make an still extraordinarily luxurious and fancy looking apple dessert. So what if apple galette became the new apple pie? And we all lived happily ever after. Pie dough has been resting in the refrigerator an hour now. The butter is nice and firm again. The dough itself is nice and firm. I'm going to grab a little flour and just powder my board along with the circle of dough. And it's really helpful to have pressed your dough into a nice ring like this, because it just speeds along your rolling process to have it already ready to go. Grab your rolling pin, and you can let it soften on the counter just a few minutes, but you can also do the pounding method that I just showed to help it start to spread. And then we are just going to be rolling this out. We want it pretty thin, actually. The key to a lovely, tender, flaky crust that is crisp in the right places, and sturdy enough to hold on to that wonderful apple filling, is to get it to the right thickness. I want it thin enough that I am going to get that crisping effect, especially in the places where when you fold the dough over, sometimes it overlaps itself. But I want it thick enough that we're not going to lose our apples to the abyss. Remember, when you're working with the dough, obviously you want to work pretty quickly. You also want to continually rotate it and flip it when you can, so that you are evenly spreading your force to create a round experience here. Now, there is a crack in my dough right here at the center, so I just keep kind of gathering that section together and then working in different directions to try to bring it together. If it gets a little sticky on the surface, a little bit more flour. This little bad guy is really giving us a hard time, so I'm going to seal them together and then try to drag it on top of each other. And this is why it's important that your dough have the right level of hydration, because you are adding a little bit more flour on now. And you don't want to use too much, but you need what you need. I'm using just enough flour so that I have movement on my dough and it's not sticking to my board, but I'm trying to avoid adding so much that we're going to run the risk of a dry pie dough, or tart dough in our case. And it looks like we are getting to a lovely even thickness here. One thing I love about a freeform tart is there's no perfect shape we're aiming for. Roughly in a circle is great, but you'll see we're really going to just kind of scoop the outer edges of dough all around our beautiful fruit. This is lovely and roughly evenly 1/8 of an inch thick around, 1/4 of an inch to 1/8 of an inch. And let's go ahead and put it onto our prepared baking sheet. Prepare yourself. Just grab some parchment paper to line that. That will just make it all the easier to lift our galette off. So when it comes to lifting your dough up, if you've been flouring appropriately, you should be in good shape to be able to get it off the board and just sort of roll it over your pin like so, and then lay it down onto your board. I'm sorry, that is endlessly gratifying when it really works out like that. And you can just sort of use a pastry brush or your fingers just to brush away any excess flour. Although that little bit of flour will come in handy, like I said. I'm going to add just a sprinkle of flour over our apple slices. Really, no more than a tablespoon. Get yourself some apricot jam and a little warm water just to loosen it up. And this is going to give us a wonderful little base layer of flavor. The water is just there to help you be able to spread and move this around. So making sure that you're keeping contained so you have enough dough to fold over the fruit inside. Spread this jammy mixture around. So I'm staying maybe 3 inches off the edge. And we're not looking for a thick slick here. We want it to make sure that we don't keep the dough too wet at the bottom, but we're just giving ourselves a little boost of flavor here. Okay, now that we have our initial painted portion, we can start to assemble the design of our apples. And for this, I'll just gather together a few slices at a time. So just line them up so they're all in sequence like so, and then we're just kind of gonna shingle them together. There's no, immediate pattern. It just sort of comes to you as you work. I find that keeping the apple varieties together can be helpful just from a size perspective. But other than that, there's really no art or method to this madness. Just make it your own. Oh, that's a pretty little collection. This fan. Ah! See? You start bragging about your fan of apples, and then destruction. I've played this super fun game of Tetris and gotten nearly all the apples filled in, and I've also played the fun game of one for me, one for you. And then I kind of just use the little pieces that are left to just fill in any gaps in the shingling of these apples. They kind of look like little armadillos, which is adorable. Okay, now that we have this great shape, now we just have to seal it up. And to do that, I'm actually gonna start over here at the sort of gnarly side because I'm gonna cover that up. You just start to bring your dough over, and you can kind of crimp as you go. Just, you notice every sort of 3-inch section, I'm pressing the dough onto itself, and it will sort of self-adhere and create this wonderfully overlapped and complete looking round shape. So like a place like here is why it's important to roll thin enough, because I'm gonna crimp it and it's gonna have 3 layers of dough here, which I actually don't really want. So if you want to avoid 3 layers of dough, you could just remove a little section and then press and keep going. Beautiful. I'm sorry. That looks phenomenal, and it hasn't even baked yet. I'm very proud of our handiwork here. To finish it off, I'm gonna take 4 tablespoons of butter, and you know what? I'll do 2 tablespoons of butter and then melted just to brush over the surface of our crust. And the other 2 tablespoons, I'm actually going to cut into little dollops, or even pinch into little dollops to scatter over the surface of our apples. And that will provide a lovely little browning effect, keep them nice and hydrated and juicy, work together with that little bit of flour to create a slightly jammy experience. We're also gonna give our crust a little texture in 2 ways. The first way will be with a little turbinado sugar, which also gives it that glistening sort of sugar plum fairy effect. Very sparkly. Grab a pastry brush and your sizzling hot melted butter. Give it a second to cool. And just use it to lacquer the edges of our galette crust. And then while the galette crust is still lovely and hydrated from this butter, go ahead and grab some turbinado sugar and sprinkle it all over the surface here. And that is why it was actually really helpful that the dough wasn't that sweet, because you're gonna get this crunch of sweetness on top, and have it still feel very balanced all around. And what the heck, I'm here, I might as well do a little scatter of crunchy sugar over the top of our apples too. Okay, this is going into a 400-degree oven, almost an hour. We're gonna keep an eye on it. The crust will be golden brown and crisp. The apples should have achieved some nice color on them and be bubbling in places and juicy. What could be better? One more thing. The galette, also called crostata in Italian, also called freeform tart in English, is smelling amazing. And you can leave it exactly as we've done it to date. It is perfect. There's crunchy sugar crystals all over it. The flavor of the apples is phenomenal. The crust looks magnifique, amazing. But I had a thought, which is that like, okay, go with me here. Sesame seeds have such a wonderful nutty richness to them. They add a little tiny bit of like textural crunch, but they really are there for like, they look beautiful. They add a savory note. They add a little bit more richness. So to finish it off, I am going to add just a little bit of apricot preserve into a pan with a little bit of water. And this is really delicious. Already so good all on its own. But I am going to add just a little gloss of honey, maybe a tablespoon here. Stir this together. And this is going to become something of a syrup that you can definitely drizzle over. In fact, the easiest version of what I'm about to do would be just to let this simmer for a second, get nice and thick and jammy again, and then just spoon it over your galette just before serving. But the slightly more intense version that I want to do, adding a little bit of salt here, is to let this cook again. Another maybe like 2 minutes, really not very long. It's already really almost at where it needs to be. And then, salty honey, jammy deliciousness. Then I'm going to brush it over the entire tart and sprinkle some sesame seeds right over top. Back in the oven, like 2 minutes. The reason I didn't add the sesame seeds earlier is because they are super delicate. They would burn. So this is how I'm getting it all in. It does take another step in the process, but I think it's really going to be worth it. Let's take a peek. Oh, this looks so good. Looks so good. Time to relieve this tart from her sauna. Oh my gosh. I mean, bubbling, golden, brown, perfection. It looks like we had a tiny little leak over here. One of the floodgates opened up, but that is sort of the beauty of it being a freeform, rustic, gorgeous, elegant tart, is that really doesn't even matter at all. It will be just as delicious as it always was. Okay, taking our beautiful glaze again here, and I'm going to anoint the crust with this blend. I'm also actually going to spread it over the apples because why not? They get a little loving. And then you can save what's left to drizzle over the completely finished tart. Take your sesame seeds and sprinkle them. And you can decide if you want them over the crust only or over the entire form. I think crust only is going to be kind of neat. I can already smell, guys, as the sesame seeds hit the heat of the hot crust. We're gonna like. Okay, remember I said it was super traditional, just like a simple apple tart? Almost got there. But we wanted to add a little something different. You can get simple apple tart anywhere. Now that it has the super delicate sesame seeds on the tart, we're gonna go in like 2 minutes, just so they get a little golden brown, re-adhere to the crust. Everything is sticky and glossy and crisp and glistening again. And then we'll be done. All right, let's get this tart out of the oven. It smells beautiful. The crust is rich and golden brown. The sesame seeds have gotten a little bit of their own color, not too much. Oh, don't you love when your dessert talks to you right there? Hello. So happy. Oh yeah. Now, as it cools, which we are going to insist on letting happen, the crust will crisp up again. You have this wonderful sheen from that lacquer of the apricot jam and honey and a little bit of salt that we added on top. So much additional flavor. I love how shiny it got, the tips of these apples. I love the color that the apples got. I'm really just stalling because, as you know, it's really hard for me to wait when the beautiful hot dessert comes out, and I'm desperate to just cut in and show you what we created. But I am going to let this cool because I want some of the delicious, almost, it's not a caramel, but there's like a caramel element to the sauce that was created by these apples with the apple, lemon, sugar, our spices with cinnamon and cardamom, that little bit of flour that we had in here, the apricot jam, and most of all, the butter. Those little dollops, those knobs of butter that we scattered all over. We've come this far. We will wait. We've been so good. We've allowed our galette to cool beautifully. And then just picture yourself, you've had a gorgeous meal with your family or your friends or for yourself, and all of a sudden it's dessert time and you pull out a completely handmade, glorious, freeform tart like this one with these shingles of beautiful apples, sweet and tart, apricot jam lingering throughout, base notes of sugar and butter, and a high note of a little pop of sesame seeds because you are an adventurous maniac. I gotta tell you, I am like very excited about what's about to happen here. Let's get in on it. Again, there's no perfect way to cut your freeform pie because every way is perfect. Wow. Just goose for a second. I need you to come in close and see the pockets of like layered flaky crust. I need like an ultra zoom. It's like a Hubble telescope to get in here and see and appreciate how crisp the bottom of this tart came out. Now, look, you could put whipped cream and other things on here, but who needs them? I want to see what's going on here. Stop. Hold the foam. From someone who does not like apple pie, the self-described apple pie naysayer, this might be my favorite dessert I've ever made. Not joking. I am so impressed, so crazily impressed with this pie dough. Can you hear this? Can you hear the crisp when it breaks apart, when it just tenderly falls apart in my mouth? The apples, all those like sweet, tart, sour Granny Smiths are front loading. They are so, okay, this is really weird, but like go with me for a second. There is a vaguely key lime pie component going on here because there's a real sweet tart balance throughout. Okay, now we're gonna try the sesame seeds. And the apples hold their texture. They're not like gluey or soft. They really have a nice tenderness to them. Okay, moment of truth. Were the sesame seeds worth it? Nutty, rich, a little savory, something different just to blow your mind when you thought apple pie desserts were doomed to be just simple, ho-hum, done before. Sesame seeds show up to show you how wrong you were. The lemon juice, that's why it's so sour and wonderful. I could not possibly give you more glowing words to tell you how wonderful this dessert is. And I highly anticipate and expect to see your photos when you make it because I want you to feel like a champion. This is the simple apple tart of champions.